You wake up to the sound of bells, loud, echoing bells. They ring through stone hallways, calling people to morning prayers. It's 1491, and you're not just anyone. You're a lady in waiting, a personal helper to the most powerful woman in Spain, Queen Isabella. Your bare feet touch the cold marble floor as you rush through the massive castle, carrying a bowl of rose water and clean cloths. The air smells like incense, but there's something else, something sour. It hits your nose and turns your stomach. You stop outside the Queen's room. Through the heavy wooden door, you hear her voice. She's praying, and she's been at it for hours. Her words rise and fall in Latin, while her fingers quietly move across her rosary beads. Finally, you step inside. There she is, kneeling in front of a giant cross. And then you notice something shocking. She's still wearing the same white dress she put on 3 months ago when Granada, Spain's last Muslim stronghold, fell. That dress? It used to be perfect white. Now it's yellow with sweat, brown with blood from where she whipped herself, and there are darker stains you really don't want to think about. The smell hits you hard. It's incense mixed with something rotten. You carefully put down the bowl, trying not to interrupt her prayer. But then you see it, something that makes your skin crawl. Tiny dark specks moving on her dress. Fleas, dozens of them, living and breeding in her clothes. Before we go deeper into this wild story, if you like hearing strange, hidden stories from history, hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It blows my mind that we're sharing these forgotten moments from across the world, connected by our curiosity. So, is this true? Well, yes and no. For centuries, people believed Queen Isabella made a vow she wouldn't change her underwear until Granada was captured. The battle lasted 8 months, and according to legend, so did her unwashed clothes.
Some people tell this story differently. Some say Queen Isabella wore the same dress not for months, but for 10 whole years. Others say it wasn't even Isabella. It was another queen entirely. Maybe one from the later Habsburg family, known for being super religious and, well, a little strange. The details change depending on who's telling it, like sand shifting in the wind, but one thing stays the same. This shocking image of a powerful woman so focused on her faith that she lived in filth that even a poor farmer would run from. Most modern historians say this story probably isn't true. They think it was either made up to make Isabella look like a holy saint or to make her look like a crazy fanatic. But here's what's wild. Even if it's fake, this story has been told and believed for over 500 years. And that tells us something big about her world. A world where holiness and horror sometimes looked exactly the same. So why does this myth feel so believable? To answer that, we have to step into the medieval mind, a time when people believed dirt could be holy, when clothes could be magical, and when the richest, most powerful people lived in ways that would make you say, wait, what? Back then, taking a bath wasn't just rare. Some people thought it was dangerous. Spain during Isabella's time was like two worlds colliding. For 700 years, Christian armies had been slowly pushing Muslim rulers farther south, a fight called the Reconquista. It finally ended when Isabella took Granada in 1492. But this wasn't just a war over land. It was a cultural clash that even affected everyday life, including how people washed themselves. In Muslim Spain, washing was a way of life. People bathed every day. They had public bathhouses called hammams in every big city. These places were incredible, big, beautiful buildings with hot pools and steam rooms. People didn't just get clean there, they also hung out, talked, and relaxed. Muslims washed 5 times a day before prayers, and their holy book, the Quran, even says cleanliness is half of faith. The water systems were genius too. Pipes and aqueducts built by the Romans kept these bathhouses running for centuries.
But in the Christian kingdoms that would one day become Spain, bathing had a terrible reputation. Church leaders thought public baths were sinful, dark, steamy places where men and women mixed, where rich and poor were equal, and where temptation lurked everywhere. Even worse, bathing was linked to Islam, Judaism, and even old pagan religions, all seen as enemies of the true faith. One early church leader of St. Jerome even said, "He who has bathed in Christ has no need of a second bath." That idea shaped Christian thinking for centuries. People believed washing too much could actually remove God's protection from baptism. Soap and water were thought to open the pores and let demons in. So the holiest people were expected to smell like blood, sweat, and holy suffering. This is the world Queen Isabella grew up in. Born in 1451 in a small town called Madrigal de las Altas Torres, she was the daughter of John II of Castile and Isabella of Portugal. Her childhood? It was rough. Civil wars, assassination attempts, political backstabbing. Staying alive mattered way more than staying clean. The royal court was basically a moving city, traveling from castle to castle with thousands of nobles, servants, guards, horses, and dogs. Wherever they went, they used up local supplies, then moved on like a swarm of locusts. And the smell? Imagine it. Unwashed bodies packed into huge stone halls, chamber pots overflowing, rotting food tossed to wild dogs, horses doing their business anywhere they wanted. In the winter of 1468, when Isabella was just 17, something happened that would forever change how she saw cleanliness. The plague hit. This was the infamous Black Death, the same disease that had already wiped out 1/3 of Europe each time it came around. It started with the rats. They crawled out of the walls in broad daylight, sick and stumbling, their fur covered in blood and pus. Then came the fleas, thousands of them, jumping from dying rats onto people. And then the humans got sick. First, fevers and chills. Then came the buboes, huge swollen lumps under the skin, sometimes as big as apples, filled with black, infected blood. Isabella watched her own servants fall ill, their skin covered in dark spots, the reason the plague was called the Black Death. She saw strong men cry for their mothers as they died in their own filth. The doctors, wearing those creepy bird-like masks stuffed with herbs, tried everything, bleeding, purging, prayers, but nothing worked. Death came anyway. But here's what shocked Isabella the most. The plague seemed to spare the dirtiest people in the court. The kitchen workers, covered in grease and food scraps, stayed healthy. The stable boys, who slept in the hay with horses and never bathed, didn't get sick at all. But the nobles, who at least washed their hands and faces sometimes, they died in huge numbers. Now this was just a coincidence, but to Isabella, it felt like proof. In her mind, washing wasn't just unnecessary, it might actually be dangerous. The truly faithful, she believed, didn't need soap and water. They needed God's protection. And in Isabella's world, that belief didn't sound crazy, it sounded holy. The late 1400s were a time of extreme religious passion in Spain. Saints like Catherine of Siena and Francis of Assisi were praised for their total rejection of comfort. Catherine was said to have drunk pus from the wounds of plague victims to show her faith. Francis never washed his hands after touching people with leprosy. To them, the body was a prison for the soul, a source of sin and temptation. Taking care of it with baths, perfumes, or fancy clothes wasn't seen as hygiene, it was seen as vanity. And vanity was a sin. For Isabella, this belief went even further. She practiced something called self-flagellation, literally whipping herself to get closer to God. 3 times a week, she'd lock herself in her private chapel, strip to the waist, and use a whip with knotted cords to lash her own back and shoulders until she bled. The pain wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. She believed by making her body hurt, she was killing temptation and becoming closer to Christ who had suffered on the cross. And the dried blood on her skin, she believed it was like a shield, protecting her from sin. Her underclothes, the linen shift she wore closest to her body, absorbed everything: her sweat, tears, dirt, oils, and the blood from her self-whippings. To her, these weren't just clothes anymore, they were sacred relics, proof of her suffering for God. This is where the famous underwear vow story begins. In April of 1491, Isabella prepared for the final battle of the Reconquista, the Siege of Granada. This was it: Christian Spain versus the last Muslim kingdom. Before leaving, she supposedly stood at the altar of the cathedral in Córdoba and made a vow. She would not change her underclothes until Granada fell. Did she actually say it? We don't know. But back then, people often made these holy bargains with God, promising to suffer in exchange for divine help. And they believed breaking such a vow could cost them their soul.
The siege itself? It was brilliant medieval strategy. Instead of attacking Granada's giant walls head-on, Isabella and her husband Ferdinand decided to starve the city into surrender. They built an entire new city called Santa Fe, just outside Granada's walls. It had churches, markets, even government offices. From there, they slowly tightened their grip around the Muslim stronghold. For 8 long months, Isabella lived in Santa Fe, leading the siege and keeping her army motivated. And if that underwear vow was real, the suffering must have been brutal. Spanish summers easily hit 100 degrees, with choking dust, smoky campfires, and thousands of sweaty, unwashed soldiers. Witnesses said Isabella grew thinner, paler, and her eyes had this intense, almost otherworldly look. She prayed constantly, often standing for hours at a small altar in her tent. Visitors noticed something unusual. She had a strange smell. Not totally bad, but organic, like old leather mixed with dried flowers. The fleas, which supposedly infested her clothes, were more than just annoying back then. People believed fleas weren't just pests, they were linked to demons. The devil was sometimes drawn as a flea-covered creature crawling out of hell. But Isabella didn't try to get rid of them. It's almost like she welcomed them, as if they were divine tests of her faith. And going that long without washing doesn't just affect your smell, it can affect your mind. Back then, doctors believed your natural body oils were important for your health. Wash them off, and you risked sickness or even madness. Modern experts think Isabella may have actually been in a kind of religious psychosis. She claimed to see angels and saints, said she heard God's voice telling her how to run her army, and became suspicious of her own advisors. That vow about her clothes? It could have been both the cause and the symptom of how deeply she believed she was chosen by God. But here's the thing. Back then, Spanish society actually admired behavior like this. There were stories everywhere about holy women who rejected normal hygiene to show their devotion. One woman, Maria de Santo Domingo, reportedly never washed her hands for 30 years, saying that being clean was spiritually weak. Another mystic, Catalina de Cardona, wore the same hair shirt for 40 years. It became so stiff with dried blood and dirt that it could literally stand up by itself. And people praised her for it. These weren't just random weirdos. This was a cultural movement, a belief that the more you suffered physically, the closer you were to God. Isabella herself helped push this idea when she created the Spanish Inquisition in 1478.
The Inquisition actually looked at hygiene as a way to spot fake Christians. If someone bathed too much, changed clothes often, or seemed too concerned with staying comfortable, suspicious. They might secretly be Muslim or Jewish, following their old cleanliness traditions. And back then, science, even though it was wrong, actually supported this thinking. Doctors believed washing too much could weaken your skin, letting bad air or evil vapors slip inside and make you sick. Unwashed bodies, they said, produced natural protective oils and even good vapors that kept illness away. And in a weird way, they had a point. Their soap was harsh, made of lye and ashes. Frequent washing did irritate skin and sometimes caused infections. Meanwhile, poorer people, who bathed less often, didn't get those problems. So people saw a pattern. Clean equaled sick, dirty equals safe. That thinking just kept reinforcing itself. The focus on underwear in Isabella's myth wasn't random either. Back then, linen, the fabric her underclothes were made of, was seen as magical and holy. It came from plants, not animals, so people thought it was pure. Angels were imagined wearing linen. Burial shrouds, linen too. Wearing linen against your skin was thought to block evil spirits. And the longer you wore it, the more sweat, blood, and tears it absorbed, the stronger it became spiritually. That's why many medieval saints wore the same linen underclothes for decades, treating them like holy relics. Isabella's court was full of these sacred objects, worn clothes, prayer beads, even shoes from holy people. People believed they could heal the sick. Some would travel hundreds of miles just to touch or kiss them. So if Isabella really did wear the same shift for months during the Siege of Granada, people would have seen it as one of the most powerful relics in all of Christendom. But wearing filthy clothes like that messes with your mind. For Isabella, it was a constant reminder of her devotion, turning every itch and every rash into a kind of prayer, proof she was willing to suffer for her faith. But it also meant isolation. The dirtier she got, the fewer people wanted to be near her. Even her closest servants probably had to fight the urge to gag while helping her. And so her vow didn't just separate her from comfort, it separated her from people too. This isolation only made Isabella's mystical side stronger and her paranoia worse. And then there were the fleas. People back then believed fleas were tiny demons sent by Satan himself to test the faithful. Every bite was like a spiritual battle, good versus evil, fought right on Isabella's skin. The fact that she endured this without complaining, people saw it as proof she was holy. But Isabella wasn't just any person. She was queen of Europe's most powerful nation. And in medieval times, whatever the queen did, everyone copied. So when Isabella refused to change her underclothes, many of her nobles stopped changing theirs too. Foreign visitors noticed immediately. One ambassador from Venice wrote that it took great courage and a strong stomach just to approach the Spanish court. Another from France said Spanish nobles seemed to wear their filth like a badge of honor. This holy dirtiness wasn't just gross, it was dangerous. The royal court became a hot spot for diseases that other kingdoms rarely saw. Skin problems, parasites, and lung infections spread like wildfire in an environment where hygiene was actually discouraged. And fleas weren't just itchy annoyances, they carried the bubonic plague. One infected person could start an outbreak that killed thousands. So how did Isabella survive all this? Maybe she was lucky. Maybe God really protected her. Or maybe she just had a natural resistance to flea-borne diseases. Either way, the Siege of Granada finally ended on January 2nd, 1492, when the Muslim leader Boabdil surrendered to Isabella and Ferdinand. And according to the legend, that's when Isabella finally changed her underwear for the first time in 8 months. The clothes she took off were supposedly so stiff with sweat, blood, and dirt that they could stand upright on their own, like a suit of armor made entirely of human filth. Whether that's true or just myth, The fall of Granada changed everything. The Reconquista was over, and now Isabella could focus on something new, supporting a man named Christopher Columbus, who would sail west just 8 months later. That same fiery faith that supposedly kept her from changing her clothes, it would soon drive her to spread Christianity across the ocean, not just changing Spain, but the entire world.
The underwear myth also reveals something bigger: how medieval society linked power and purity. For a queen to live in filth wasn't seen as weakness, it was a flex of authority. Only someone untouchable, someone whose power couldn't be challenged, could risk looking so vulnerable. We see this in other royal traditions too. Kings and queens would sometimes dress like peasants, serve food to beggars, or publicly humiliate themselves, but always in ways that made them seem more powerful, not less. Isabella's alleged underwear vow fits perfectly into this mindset. A private devotion turned into a public display that raised her spiritual status even as it degraded her physically. And there's another layer: gender. In medieval Europe, women's bodies were often seen as dirty and dangerous, tempting men into sin. But by embracing that dirtiness, Isabella flipped the script, turning shame into power. It also made her seem unapproachable, even repulsive, which actually helped her politically. In a male-dominated world where female rulers were often sexualized or dismissed, Isabella made sure no one would see her as an object of desire. And here's where it gets even grosser. Medieval undergarments weren't simple. Rich women's linen shifts had layers of fabric, tight seams, and complicated fastenings. After weeks or even months of wear, those layers trapped moisture, bacteria, and parasites. Basically, it became a warm, damp ecosystem for everything you don't want on your skin. The itching and burning from that? Isabella likely saw it as spiritual testing, proof she was getting closer to God. Psychologically, this makes sense. Humans have the strange ability to turn suffering into meaning. Isabella's refusal to change wasn't a random self-punishment. It was a mental system she built where discomfort became holy and pain felt like progress. And the timing mattered too. Europe was changing fast, politically and spiritually. The Protestant Reformation was still years away, but cracks in the Catholic Church's power were already showing. People were hungry for leaders who were truly devoted to their faith. So Isabella's extreme devotion, even if it was messy and gross, made her look like a living saint, someone willing to sacrifice everything, even her dignity, for God.
Back then, life was already dirty. No plumbing, no antibacterial soap, no understanding of germs. Even the wealthy struggled with hygiene, so the line between clean and dirty was thin to begin with. So, someone like Isabella embracing extreme filth? It was basically taking what was already normal and turning it up to 11. And despite all of this, Isabella's reputation didn't collapse. She's still remembered as one of Spain's greatest queens, the woman who united the country and started its golden age. The underwear story? It's just a footnote in her legacy. That's no accident. The Spanish monarchy and Catholic Church carefully shaped how she was remembered. Anything that made her seem crazy or fanatical got pushed aside. Anything that made her seem holy, that stayed front and center. The result? A polished, clean version of history that hides the stranger, darker parts of medieval life. And the reality is, wearing unwashed clothes for that long is dangerous. We're talking about skin infections, urinary tract problems, even illnesses that can mess with your brain. Some historians even think Isabella's later mood swings and paranoia might have been linked to infections caused by poor hygiene. And this isn't just medieval weirdness. Even today, there are religious devotees around the world who purposely neglect their bodies, choosing pain and discomfort as spiritual paths. The psychology behind it, the same mindset Isabella allegedly had, is still with us. And the myth itself, it still fascinates us, because it's about more than just underwear. It's about power, faith, gender, and even sexuality. The image of a powerful queen living in her own filth hits something deep inside us. It's unsettling, it's weirdly human, and it forces us to think about how messy even the most powerful lives can be. So, did Isabella really make that vow and keep it? Honestly, that might not even matter. Because the myth itself tells us everything about the world she lived in. A world where suffering meant holiness, where filth could mean purity, and where the most powerful woman in Europe could be celebrated for something most of us would be embarrassed to admit. In Isabella's world, the line between sanctity and insanity was razor thin.
As the sun rises over the Alhambra in Granada, 5 centuries after Isabella's big victory, the city looks completely different. The fountains that once fed Islamic bathhouses now water Christian gardens. The intricate patterns on the palace walls? Gone, replaced by crosses and saints. The Muslim call to prayer that once echoed across the city? Silent, replaced by the tolling of church bells. But if you listen closely, in the shadows of these ancient palaces, you might still imagine it. The sound of fabric scratching against skin, nails digging into linen, and the soft whispered prayer of a queen who believed salvation could be found in suffering. The underwear myth may not be true, but the world that created it was very real. A world where sacred and disgusting could exist in the same space. A world where something horrifying, like not changing your clothes for months, could actually be seen as holy. Maybe that's the most unsettling part. Not the myth itself, but the mindset behind it. The fleas are long gone, but the ideas that allowed them to thrive, they're still here. The idea that pain can equal holiness, that cleanliness is vanity, that the body is an enemy to be conquered, not cared for. In the end, Isabella's story, true or not, isn't just about one queen's underwear. It's about how humans think, about how faith, power, and suffering can mix in ways that look strange, even terrifying to us now. It reminds us that history isn't just kings and battles. It's people. People who lived, believed, and sometimes suffered in ways we can barely imagine. And Isabella's world, the line between devotion and degradation, it wasn't drawn by logic or comfort. It was drawn by faith alone.